And firstly, before we begin, we should say that the limud should be Le'ilui Nishmat Avi Moridov Ber Meir Ben Ruven Halevi Imi Merati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And I say today's shiur should be dedicated also to the memory of the leader who we lost very, very recently this Shabbat, Rabbi Sachs, a great leader among Klal Yisrael, and he will be tough to replace. I'll leave it at that. So tonight I wanted to focus a little bit on a few of the things that we have that we see in the parish of Chayai Sara. Perhaps the most remarkable of all of the parashot in Bereshit in terms of the fact that we have the same story repeated multiple times, and it's a story that seems to only peripherally involve any of the characters that we would ordinarily perceive as being our role models. If we think about the book of Bereshit as a whole, we tend to think of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, perhaps Yaakov's sons, the Shvatim, maybe Noach in certain aspects as our primary role models, in a positive sense, certainly. And yet we have all of this ink in this week's parsha dedicated to a story about Eliezer, who seems to be no other than a simple Eved Avraham. If we go through the entire parsha, his name is not mentioned. He's simply called Eved Avraham in relation to Avraham. He's called Ha'ish in relation to the people who he's coming to visit. And yet, interestingly enough, if we go through this one short parsha, this one short parak in the Torah of this story, at the beginning of the story, he is Eved Avraham. And by the end of the story, interestingly enough, when Rivka says, "Who's this person coming to meet us?" It's Yitzchak. It turns out he says, "Hu Adoni." So we see that in the course of this story, this Eved goes from being Eved Avraham to Eved Yitzchak, and perhaps this is really the parsha that I will call the passing of the torch, perhaps from Avraham being the primary personage that we are focusing on to Yitzchak being the primary personage that we're going to focus on. Although in this week's parsha, I would say that again that transition happens, and Yitzchak clearly does not appear to take a very active role in this week's parsha. That will happen in next week's parsha. But nonetheless, we already see that um, the lessons that we have to learn from Avram Avinu seem to already have been recorded, even though Avram is going to live after sending his Eved to get a wife for Yitzchak, he's going to live another 35 years. We really don't have much left in the Torah recorded about those last 35 years, other than Avram has a whole new family. But there's no events per se in the life of Avram that are recorded. uh, I guess there is one exception to that Abraham does ensure that there is no question as to who his spiritual successor is. He divides up his estate and provides for all of his offspring appropriately, and passes on his spiritual heritage clearly to Yitzchak, his son, so that there's no question and no quarreling among the offspring of the different wives. Okay. Having said that, we'll go back to Eliezer, and I wanted to focus on a couple of things that seem to be rather small, perhaps small details in the story, but I wanted to see how the Mefarshim focus on those and what the lessons they try to bring from these two things are. So one is a very short one. At the beginning, when the servant leaves to undertake his journey, we have a very, very interesting pasuk, and I'm quoting now from Parak Chav Dalid in Parshat Chayai Sara. The first pasuk that I'm going to talk about very simply is pasuk Yud, where it tells us that Vayikacha Eved Asara Gemalim Migmalei Adonav Vayelech. the servant who, as I said, he's referred to as the servant of Avram through the whole story. He takes 10 camels from his master's camels and he goes. And Rashi interestingly says, what is it? What is the Torah trying to add by telling us they were Migmalei Adonav? Obviously, if the servant took 10 camels, he didn't steal them off the street. They obviously were camels that belonged to Avram. Why does it have to add the words Migmalei Adonav from his servant, from his master's camels? To tell us, Rashi says, Nikarim Hayumish Argumalim, that Avraham's camels were easily recognizable from other camels. Why? Yotzim zemumim mipnei hagezel shelo yiru bisadot acherot. That Avraham's camels always went out muzzled, so that they shouldn't pasture, they shouldn't be eating from other people's fields, and because Avram took extra precautions to avoid uh, theft from other people. Even his camels took extra precautions. Um, and the we know a very interesting Gemara that tells us that that in general, animals that belong to righteous people seem to have a sixth sense that they belong to these righteous individuals, and perhaps can sense that. There are a couple of different stories in the Gemara. One, of course, I guess is fairly well known, is the story about the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, that would not eat a food that had not had masa removed from it, even though the poor animal was probably very hungry. Um, and it seems that the Gemara wants to ask, if that's the case, why did Avram have to have his camels muzzled? Why would that be? And Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, in his commentary on Rashi, tries to explain that very simply, even though perhaps the camels knew in and of themselves that they shouldn't be stealing other people's property, nonetheless, ain't somchim al hanes. We shouldn't have to. We don't rely on a miracle, and when we can take a precaution to avoid something happening, that we should be doing that. And I think that's what, according to Mizrahi, Rashi wants to be teaching us by mentioning this, that we should take extra precautions when there is a possibility that something that we own could possibly do damage. And I think we need to, that's a lesson that we need to take from this pasuk, that we have to go that extra step to try to avoid harming others, because that is, again, something that many people say, oh, it doesn't really matter. What difference does it make? And we have to do that. And I think the Torah wants to point that out by adding these words, so just a short, quick thought from the beginning of the story, and then later on in the story, we have a number of things that happen that seem to be a little bit strange. And if we go through the two versions of the story, one, I guess, as it's happening, as the Torah records it as it's happening, the other as Eliezer then recounts the entire events to Rivka's family, we find a number of discrepancies, one of which is perhaps a very glaring discrepancy, and the commentaries try to understand exactly what it is that this discrepancy is trying to point out. So if we go through the story as it happens, we find that in verse, I gotta get my psukim right here, in pasuk chaf bet, the Torah tells us the following. First, if we're just to get the story ready, so you would put us in the frame of where it is. Eliezer says offers this prayer to Hashem, please send somebody out. I'll ask her for water. She'll give me water. She'll say, I'll also bring water to the camels. And Rivka comes out. He asks her for water. She says, here, take a drink, and I'll give water for all the camels too. And he's watching her doing all this. And then it says in Pasuk Chav Bet, when the camels had finished drinking, the man takes a gold nezim, English. Ring, thank you, nose ring. A gold nose ring, which weighed a becca, whatever it was. The becca is half, I guess, a shekel. Ushnei tzmidim al yadeha, and two bracelets for her hand. Asara zahav mishkalam, they weighed 10 gold was their weight. And then it says in Pasuk Chav Gimel, Vayomer bat mi'at, he asks her, whose daughter are you? Hagidi nali, please tell me. And then Hayesh beit avich makom lanu lalin, please tell me whether in your father's house there's a place for us to spend the night. And she answers his questions, and the story continues. Now, when he repeats the story, he says the following. I watched her, I was doing this. And then he says, after she finished feeding the camels, he says the following, verse 47 in the same chapter 24. Vo'esh al ota, I asked her, bat mi, avomar bat mi'an, I said, whose daughter are you? Bat Tomer, and she replied, bat Betuel ben Nachor, asher yolda lo milka, I am the daughter of Betuel, the son of Nachor, who Milcah bore to him. Betuel, his mother was Milcah. Vasim hanezim alapa, and then I put the nose ring on her nose, vatzmidim al yadeha, and the bracelet is on her hand. Okay, so the question of many of the commentaries try to understand is, which is the order? Does he give her the jewelry first, and ask her second, or does he ask her first and give her the jewelry second? And why does it make a difference? And why does the Torah seem to have two different versions of the story? So we'll start with Rashi's perspective on this whole thing. Rashi says very simple, that there is a very specific reason that the Torah wants us to understand what he did versus what he said. So what he did, very simply, was he immediately, upon watching her and having her complete the task, immediately gives her the jewelry. And Rashi says, and then he asks her who she is, and Rashi says very clearly, li'achar shenatan la sha'ala. First, he gave her the jewelry, then he asked her. Why? Lefi shahaya batuach bizchuto shel Avram shitzliach HaKadosh Baruch Hu darko. He was 100% certain that the answer was going to be, she was going to be suitable for Yitzchak, that she was going to be from Avraham's family. Because of his prayer to Hashem, he was certain that Hashem was going to answer his prayer in the merit of Avraham, and therefore he wasn't worried about giving away jewelry to somebody who wasn't going to be marrying Yitzchak. That's Rashi's. And then now, if that's the case, if he was so certain and is so confident in Hashem's providing for Avraham's merit, providing the proper shidduch, why does he change the story later on? Rashi answers on verse 47 the following. He says, Shina Haseder, that he specifically and deliberately changed the order. Why? Because obviously the order, according to Rashi, was that first he gave and then he asked. Ella shalo yitpesuhu bidvarav v'yomer hechnatata v'adayin ein chayodaya mihi, so that they don't trip him up on his own word by asking, wait a minute, how could you have given her the jewelry if you didn't know who she was yet? In other words, from the perspective of Lavan and Betuel, for him to have given the jewelry before he knew that she was the right one would have been ridiculous, because you'd be throwing money away. And that was, for them, that was a seemingly ridiculous thing to do. For Eliezer, it was obvious that that was okay to do, but he did not want them to think he was a fool and was interested in throwing his money away, or his master's money away. And so in order to keep them from getting the wrong impression, he has to switch the order intentionally. And that's Rashi's perspective on this, okay? Others have a very, very different take on that. We'll start with Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, who says the following. He says the following, Yesh Lomar, there are those that wanted to say she'achar shesho'al law bat mi'at natan law, that he did not give her the jewelry until after he asked her who she was and she had responded favorably. Kimosha katuv lefanenu b'sipur devarav, just like it's written before us in the Torah, in the order, in his retelling of the story. And so, according to Rashbam, it appears that the whole reason that the retelling of the story is there is to make sure or one of the reasons, and the differences are there, are to highlight the fact that as he's retelling the story, he's retelling it as he remembers it, and that's a lot precisely the way it was. Elishal lahavstik seder divarav uchuvat divareha lachein hikbim masa nitinato shenatan la. But again, Rashbam wants to answer if the case is that he gave it to her only after he asked, why did the Torah write the giving out of order? And the answer is because the Torah wanted to first focus on everything that he had done, then focus on everything that he says to her and their dialogue, so that because that leads us directly into the rest of the story, into the moving forward with the story. Whereas had it had to interrupt after he asked her the questions and she responded with, again, going back and saying that he then gave her the jewelry, it would have made the story in the beginning more awkward in terms of narrative. And so even though the Torah seems to write that he gave it to her first and then asked her, nonetheless, Rashbam says that wasn't the way it happened. That's only the Torah writing to make it economical in terms of the writing, and that verse is out of order. Again, as I said, each of these have to give an answer and explain why the order is different. And so Rashi tries to explain it by saying that the servant deliberately changes the order. Rashbam says no, that the narrator, Kivyachol, or the author, that Hashem, when he's writing the Torah, and the style of the Torah has to be written to include all of what happened before what is discussed and what happened. Otherwise, it wouldn't flow as smoothly. That's Rashbam's perspective. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Now, Ramban has a very different approach to this whole thing. He tries to basically synthesize the two by saying that they are both right. Both versions of the story are correct. There's no difference between the two. It's that one focuses us on one fact and the other focuses us on another fact. And this is how Ramban explains it. Hakasav hazeh yechasar hamaseh. The first pasuk simply says that the man took the jewelry. It doesn't say what he did with the jewelry. It says he took the nose ring, he took the bracelets, and then he asks her who she is, and we don't find out whatever happened to this jewelry. We do later on in the story when he tells later on, he says, oh, by the way, I then put the jewelry on her. But that part of the story is missing in the story as it happens. Nowhere does it say that he put the jewelry or he gave her the jewelry. It just says that he took the jewelry. Okay, which means I guess he took it out of his, jewelry bag, or his, whatever wherever he was keeping the jewelry. And that's exactly what Ramban wants to say. If the Rashi's perspective is correct, then the verse should have said, "Vayikacho ish nezem zahav." He took the nose ring, vayiten alapa, and he put it on her nose, vayes shnei tzmidim, and he put it on her hand. But that's not what the verse says. The verse just says that he took them out. Lakach ani omer ki perusho vayikacho ish nezem zahav ushnei tzmidim sheyihu al yadeha. He took them this jewelry that was suitable for her nose and her hands. And Vayomer La, and then he asked her who she was. After she responded favorably, oh, I'm Betuel, then then he gives her the jewelry as the gift. Kasher Amar Lahem, exactly as he told her family. That was what happened. And Ramban says this is a principle that we have many places in the Torah where a story is repeated in two parts, where part of the story is omitted in one version and then elucidated upon in the second version, and vice versa. Things that were elucidated on in the first version are sometimes glossed over in the second version. That's Ramban's explanation, that it happened exactly as the Torah says. He took out the jewelry and was ready to give it to her, but he didn't give it to her until after she answered the question. Again, trying to reconcile the difference between the two versions in the Torah. Uh, and similarly, Chizkuni has a very similar explanation to Ramban, that again he took the jewelry out to be prepared when she responded to the questions. If the answers were the correct answers, he had the jewelry already out to give her. He adds that thing that specifically if she was the proper, she fit Avram's criteria of being from his family, then she was going to get the jewelry. If not, obviously not. But then he asks her the questions to make sure that she has the right yichus, and then he does give her the jewelry exactly as he says. Okay. I wanted to also focus in each of these, just to back up one step before we go to Abarbanel, who gives a whole long explanation on this whole story. The fact is that, as I said, Rashi uses the discrepancy in the two to show us how far a person's faith can go in terms of their complete confidence that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching over them, is going to answer their tefillot. And I guess perhaps because Eliezer had spent so much time with Avraham and watched all of the things that had transpired in his life, he felt enough confidence and had enough faith that Hashem was going to provide the right answer. And I think perhaps this is exactly why this Rashi perhaps is trying to also hint at, why is it that Avraham would have entrusted such a delicate and yet critical task to the Jewish nation to Eliezer? And if we look at the outcome again with our 2020 hindsight, it's obvious that Avram did choose the right man for the job. He clearly had somebody who had it. But I think Rashi wants to focus us on perhaps why was it? What was it that Eliezer had that made him so perfect for this job, the exact right person for this job? And I think that's what Rashi is utilizing, this possible discrepancy in the text, as we've seen from Chizkuni, Ramban, who try to say, well, there's no discrepancy in the text whatsoever. So it seems that Rashi utilizes this to bring forth this specific lesson of how strong our emunah, how strong our bitachon can be, and gives us insight into why Abraham felt comfortable entrusting Eliezer with this task instead of himself going back to Haran. Abarbanel suggests concerning why it is that Eliezer is dispatched as opposed to Yitzchak himself or Avram, suggests again that Avraham, because of his advanced age, as the pasuk specifically says, Avram Zakein Ba Bayamim, that he is rather old and advanced in years, and that's why he didn't want to undertake this task himself. And he suggests that the reason Yitzchak wasn't suitable for this task is because Yitzchak had never lived there either. Yitzchak had lived his whole life away from the family. The only family he knew was Avraham and Sarah. He didn't know the rest of his extended family, had never met them, probably wouldn't know them if he ran into them on the street. And as such, there was no benefit from him going there, no reason for him to go there. Obviously, all the Mefarshim want to say that the reason Yitzchak is not allowed to go look for his own wife is because he's not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael, having been set aside as a korban at the Akedah, and as such, he's not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. That's what the Mefarshim want to tell us. But from a practical reason, there was no benefit to be gained by sending Yitzchak because, again, he had no knowledge of his extended family, as far as being able to make any difference from Eliezer going. Okay, having said all that, Abarbanel also seems to come down, come also on the side of Ramban Chizkuni in terms uh, of the sequence of events, but he adds a little bit more color to the story, and I really wanted to just focus a little bit on his commentary in terms of the whole story in and of itself. One of the challenges of understanding this whole narrative for us who live in the 21st century is the whole concept of the well. What does one do at the well? When one gets to the well? How does it work? Because we're not used to going to wells. We, walk into our kitchen, we turn on a faucet, and there's water. We don't understand the whole concept of what it means to come in from a journey, to go to a well, and to drink. So, Barbanel, I guess perhaps back then it was perhaps a little bit more common that there would have been wells. Not everybody had running water in their house. I guess in Barbanel's times, probably nobody did. And so he wants to he goes into a little bit more about the whole story and the whole underlying rationale behind Eliezer using specifically this method to try to find a wife for Yitzchak. So first, again, he enlists clearly, as the psukim tell us, Eliezer's first job is to enlist Hashem's help. And the reason that Abarbanel suggests this is a very, very simple, expeditious answer. He says very simply, so that Kolomar shelo yitztarech lechapes b'pitchei sharim ba'ir v'umi mi v'mi sheyesh lo banot linaseu mahema. That he didn't want to go to the local shadchan. He didn't want to have to go find who the local shadchan was. He didn't want to have to go through a whole long search. So he enlists Hashem's aid, which is something that often we might not even think of. It's like, although we automatically do it. Think about, for example, when you're running late for something and there's a traffic jam and you look up and say, Hashem, well, why'd you do this to me? Instead of saying, Hashem, could you please help me get this traffic moving a little bit? But that's what we should automatically be doing when we run into something where we realize that we need a little help. We should be turning to Hashem and saying, Hashem, can you help us through this? Because we just physically may not have the ability to do it. Whether it's somebody is ill and we're praying on their behalf, we should be focusing on davening to Hashem. And I think that's one of the key lessons that Eliezer imparts to us throughout this whole story in terms of his faith in Hashem, is that it's okay to ask Hashem for help. That's what Hashem, I'm not saying that's what Hashem is here for, but that's what Hashem wants us to do. Hashem wants us to realize that there are times when we can't do it all by ourselves, when we need Hashem's help. And Eliezer, by asking Hashem explicitly for his help, is acknowledging A, that Hashem has the ability to help me, and B, that I need his help. And so those are two critical components of tefillah that Eliezer is imparting to us in a very, very simple way that we often almost overlook in the whole detail. And because we're so familiar with the story, we often overlook that and don't even think about, wait a minute, why is that specific part of the story there? Eliezer reminding us that it's okay to ask Hashem for help, and we should be asking Hashem for help. Not just that it's okay, that it's good to be asking Hashem for help, to realize that Hashem has the ability to help us, and that there are times when we can't do it on our own, we do need Hashem's help. Okay, so that's a very important lesson. I think we have to get there. Secondly, the way he approaches this whole thing of clearly the character test that's involved in asking somebody for help and that person saying, sure, I'll help you, is not a given. Clearly, Eliezer is traveling with 10 camels. He's got other people with him, because later on, when they come to the house, it says that they give he gives Mayim lechotzba glover or gleho anashim asherito. Eliezer was not traveling alone. He's traveling with an entourage, and as such, clearly they weren't traveling without water jugs or water bottles or means to get their own water. So why would he need to go ask a stranger for water? And Abarbanel wants to suggest that Rivka understood, wait a minute, there's something about this guy. He's not just asking me for water because he has no way to get water by himself, because he's got a whole entourage with him. They didn't come with no water bottles and no means to get water because they wouldn't be traveling that way. So, זה מוכיח גם כן על רוב שכלה שחישבה והתבוננה של אילו סיבה שאלתי לזה. Why is he asking me for water? Is this a test? Am I on candid camera? Does he want to see what am I going to do? And she says, okay, and that's an important aspect of the story, that she realizes that there's something more to it than just a stranger asking for water. The Gamyora, but again, her response, her immediate and favorable response, also teaches us al nidivut liba, how she is a generous person, because she doesn't say, hey, come on, go get your own water. It's the free water here. It's not like she's charging or anybody's charging for it. You can go get your own water. It's free. But she doesn't say that. She immediately says, sure, here, I'll give you a drink. So this whole concept of linking the choice and the selection to the concept of chesed, which is such an integral part of Avram's household, also Abarbanel focuses on and wants us to understand as a critical aspect component of the story, an important lesson for us to realize that our spiritual genes, the genes of Am Yisrael, are, as we say, Rachmanim, Baishanim, Gomle, Chasadim, that being generous should be an integral part of who we are as a Jew. And it's from Rivka, from Avram Avinu, that we learn these things. Again, another important lesson that we see from the story, that Eliezer, through his choice of courses of action to take, makes that a focal point of our heritage, of who we are as a nation going forward. So I hope that some of these lessons are lessons that resonate in terms of, making sure we go that extra step to make sure we don't harm others, going out of our way to help others, and realizing that we can't do it all ourselves. We need Hashem's help, and we need to reach out to Hashem to get that help. And I think some of those are just some of the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of the lessons that this gentleman, who isn't one of the Avot, but nonetheless is a important character in the legacy and in the story of the Avots, comes to teach us this week. So I hope we will take all these lessons to heart and continue to use them to grow closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to help all of Am Yisrael come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so that we can be Zocha to Gula Shlema B'mheira V'yameinu. Thank you all.
Right.
Apologize, I went a little bit longer than usual this week. And I open the floor now for comments, questions, or feedback.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Andy. You had a comment.
Yeah. The simple answer is that he knew she was, and that's why he gave it to her. But as Rashi said, he was trying to prove to them that he was.
How could he have known who she was? Was he enough?
Because it says in last week's parsha that Avram knew about Rivka. He knew exactly who she was.
Okay,
that's why he gave it to her. By the way, if you're interested, just
wait a second. Wait, Andy, hold on.
Aaron, wait.
Go ahead.
Anyway, if you're interested, I wrote this as an article like 25 years ago in Tradition.
Okay.
And if you want to, you can see it on my website, Lo Bashamayim.
Okay.
So if anybody's interested, they can read the whole thing there.
Andy, can you send me the link on WhatsApp?
On the Lo Bashamayim, go into Lo Bashamayim and type in All the World's a Stage.
All the World's a Stage?
Yeah.
On what? On what website? What's the website?
My website, Lo Bashamayim.
I don't know what your website is, Andy. You got it. I don't
know.
Okay,
go Lo Bashamayim. Lo Bashamayim.
How do you spell Lo Bashamayim, in Hebrew or in English?
LOBASHAMAYM.
Poetry
Yeah, I'll try to find it for you. I'll send it to you.
Oh yeah, send me a link in WhatsApp. Thank you.
Anyway, yeah. So it's that seems to me the obvious.
Okay. I
Yeah,
I
he knows
I have a
Jew.
problem how Eliezer would have known out of all the girls who were coming out to the well who Rivka was.
He obviously knew because he ran to her. Who ran to her? Wasn't such
Rashi
a
has the Medrash answers why he ran, but okay. But
okay. Anyway,
okay.
that's my thought. Anyway, that's
Okay.
it.
Thank you.
Go
I
yeah.
have a problem with that, but okay.
Let's end it there.
Elliot, good.
Bishop
You
shot
want
it.
to say
That's what I tell
something?
my kids. Bishop shot. You can argue.
Okay. Elliot, you had a comment.
No, I just sent the link.
Oh, Lo Bashamayim.
Oh,
Lo
thanks, Elliot.
Bashamayim. Low. All right. Okay, I'll have to pull that up
Aaron,
for.
Aaron, why
Yes,
do we
it's-
why do we cry? Why do we decry our daughters today in the 21st century wearing nose rings when it was the fashion in those days? Okay. Don't answer.
There were a lot of things that change over time in terms of fashions of both clothing and jewelry that may very well have been acceptable, more or less acceptable at different times in history. I personally am not a big jewelry fan. I'm not a big piercing fan, whether it's nose, ears, eyes, or other body parts. But whoever wants, I go for it. Okay.
Have a good evening.
Okay. Any other
Okay,
comments,
see you guys.
questions?
No, see you guys.
All right. Thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll be in touch.